Welcome to the Smart Personal Finance Podcast. I'm your host, Renaud Gagne, and today is the very first episode. Now, like every good first episode worth their salt, my goal for today is to introduce myself, to explain why I started this podcast in the first place and what you can expect from listening to it. So let's start there. Who am I? Like I said in the introduction, my name is Renaud Gagne. I live with my wife and my daughter a little up north of Montreal, and if you would have told me 10 years ago that I would be speaking to you about personal finance, I would have called you crazy. I was the last person you could expect to be interested in personal finance. In fact, in my mid-20s, I was the kind of person who was living paycheck to paycheck, and I had racked up this huge debt. For me anyway. And rather than trying to deal with it, I decided back then to just ignore it and just bury my head in the sand. And to this day, I gotta tell you, I understand why people decide not to think or deal with their death. There's this huge guilt and shame that comes with that. It's painful, and ignoring it works, at least for the short term. Now, I had got this loan from what I believe would be this great training about business, which I thought naively would bring me a big break, which of course didn't happen. Here I was a few years later, working a dead-end job at the other side of the country with a debt that I never thought I could repay. So here I was, and ignoring it works until you start, waking up in the middle of the night with a panic attack. So I took my courage with both hands and decided to find a way to pay it back. And that was really the beginning of my personal finance education. I got a consumer proposal, which basically consolidated my debt and freezed it at 0% interest rate. And it had this benefit of having a plan with the agency to pay it back. But the downside was that my credit was completely ruined. But hey, there's nowhere else to go but up at this point, right? So what happened then? Well, I believe that there's something magical that happens when we face what we most fear. I discovered that money was a terrible master, and that if I wanted to live a more joyful life, that I had to take back control over my finance, and it started with little things like learning how to budget properly. But then after reading books after books, listening to podcasts, engaging in forums, and applying what I've learned to my personal life, I finally got a pretty good handle on this topic, and even to this day, I'm learning something new, and it's this huge topic of interest for me. So why this podcast? I mean, it's not like there isn't already a huge amount of books and podcasts available out there for people to learn from. Well, to that I would say I started this podcast to scratch my own itch. I'm making the kind of podcast I wish already existed, because either the information you encounter out there is way too generic and is for the mass market, or it's way too in-depth for the average person. And I hope to strike a happy middle to give a nuanced perspective on different strategies someone can take regarding their financial plan, depending on what's their goals. Another big motivator for me is whenever I go out there and read some of the statistics about how Canadians are handling their retirement, it's abysmal, and it's really, really sad. For example, in the last quarter 2018, the average Canadian save less than 1%. All the while, the debt of their family is growing thanks to very cheap interest rate. To add insult to injury, most of the information that's available out there is sponsored by banks and Wall Street. And from my own research, I truly believe that there's a better way of going about creating a financial plan than what's advertised out there. Most of people's financial plan consists of, let's reduce taxes right now by having an RRSP and putting this money there so that I don't pay too much taxes now, without really thinking as a whole for your life. Is that the only vehicle you're ever going to put money into? How is that going to affect your taxes in the future? All those things are a really important question to ask ourselves. But this is what the average Canadian deals with. Either they're able to contribute to their RSP, or they even get a loan in order to reduce their taxes right now. On top of that, year goes by, and when they look at the numbers, the percentage that is advertised on the paper doesn't reflect the actual numbers of the growth of their savings. So all of those things are huge motivators for me to start a personal finance podcast, to help people create a better plan to create a better future for themselves. So what can you expect to learn about by listening to the Smart Personal Finance podcast? Well, I hope to be talking about things like very interesting strategies to actually make budgeting work and flexible, saving rates versus rate of return, and different ways to grow your savings, credit score, how to repair it, taxes, really interesting taxes strategy that I've learned, debt repayment strategy, retirement planning. We can go on and on. There's all those topics that are really, I can't wait to dive into. Now, this is probably going to be the shortest episode I'm ever going to do on the Smart Personal Finance podcast, but here are the big takeaway. First, I'm really excited to be launching this podcast and for you to be a part of it. I don't know if you are walking down the street, or if you're washing the dishes, or if you're driving your car right now, but to be a part of your life and to be able to share with you and learn with you about personal finance, to me, is the most exciting thing in the whole wide world. Secondly, I built a financial quiz that is available on the smartpersonalfinance.ca. You just go on the website, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it, and you'll be able to learn in the process. I've designed this so that to be the kind of question that will make you ponder how you're acting out your personal finance plan as we speak. And finally, if you have any particular question about your personal finance, make sure to drop the question in the contact form of the website so that I can get back to you, and maybe even create a podcast on the question that you've raised, with your permission, of course. So this is the end of the first episode. Thank you so much for being here. I'm signing off, and I'm seeing you on the next podcast.